האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobre V'Yetzer. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Ki Tavo. And before we begin the Zera Shimshon, we're going to take a look at two psukim. One is at the end of Ki Tavo, and one is at the beginning of the next Parsha, Parshas Nitzavim. So here's our pasuk at the end of Ki Tavo, Perek Chavtes, pasuk Ches. Ushmartem es divrei habris hazos va'asisem osam. And you should observe the words of this covenant, and you should do them. Leman taskilu es kol asher ta'asun, in order that you should be successful in everything that you do. That's the end of last pasuk in Ki Tavo. And now a few psukim into Parshas Nitzavim, we have Perek Chavtes also, pasuk Yud Beis. Leman hakim oscha hayom lo la'am, in order to establish you today for him, meaning for Hashem as a people, v'hu yihyeh lecha le'elokim, and he will be for you as a God, ka'asher diber lach, as he spoke to you, v'cha'asher nishbal avosecha la'avraham le'yitzchok u'le'yakov, and as Hashem swore to your forefathers, to Avraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. So the possible connection between the end of Ki Tavo and the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim is going to be really the main topic that the Zera Shimshon is going to start with, and we'll see how those two psukim play a role in the discussion. So let's begin here in the Zera Shimshon, Os Yud Beis, section number 12. Ushmartem es divrei habris hazos, and you should observe the words of this covenant. That's the pasuk at the end of Ki Tavo. Usemich le, and very close to that pasuk, the next pasuk is Atem Nitzavim. You are standing here in front of Hashem. Ktsas hameforshim dochaku atzmam. Some of the commentators forced themselves or made themselves, worked on lahavin smichozeh, to understand this juxtaposition. V'hadeni mohem, and the law, meaning the correct approach, is with them, meaning those commentators who said we need to understand the connections between the end of Ki Tavo and the beginning of Nitzavim, that's the correct approach. Those Meforshim who didn't think that was an important topic or didn't think there was something significant there, Zera Shimshon says that was not the correct approach. The correct approach is to understand that there is a connection between the end of Ki Tavo and the beginning of Nitzavim. Mishum shekosav Radbaz b'tshuva tafshin samech tes, because the great Radbaz wrote in one of his responsa, shemuchrach lomar, that we are compelled to say sheparshas atem Nitzavim, that the Parsha of Nitzavim, Kishura Lemala, is connected above in Parshas Ki Tavo with Parshas Ki Tavo. We have to say that has to be true. De'ilav hachi, because if that were not true, kosher, we would have a major difficulty. Lama baklolo shel Ki Tavo. Here's the difficulty that we would have if you don't posit a connection between the two parshios. How come baklolo shel Ki Tavo, with the curses of the tochacha, the rebuke section of Parshas Ki Tavo, lo nichtavu nechamos acharehen, no words of consolation are written after them? Meaning, if you look at the well-known section, the terrifying section, which we call the tochacha, the admonition, the curses that God forbid, the Torah tells us will happen to the Jewish people if they violate Hashem's word and stray far from Hashem. So after those words, there's no consolation. There's no words that we would expect of Nechama, of saying, however, things will turn out and the Jewish people will do tshuva and Hashem will forgive them. We don't find any of that in Parshas Ki Tavo. Kimo osan shel b'chukosai, as we do find in the other place in the Torah where there is a tochacha where there are these curses and terrible words about the possible punishments, God forbid, that could befall the Jewish people. There, afterwards, there are words of consolation, but here there are not. In Ki Tavo, there are not. Ela lefisha hakol parsha achas. However, since it's all one section, meaning since Nitzavim, next week's parsha, is connected to Ki Tavo, yesh afkan nechamos basofa. There are words of consolation at the end of the tochacha, at the end of the rebuke and the terrible punishments that are described. Kedichsiv, as it says in Parshas Nitzavim, v'hoya ki yavo'u, and it will be when you come, meaning that the Jewish people will ultimately return to Hashem, and that's what it says in Parshas Nitzavim. And so the Zera Shimshon, by bringing down the Radbaz, says we absolutely must understand and accept that there's Shemuchrach lomar sheparshas atem nitzavim. We are compelled to say that the parsha of atem nitzavim, our parsha of nitzavim, kishura lamala in parsha Ki Tavo, in parshas Ki Tavo, is connected to the parsha before it, which is our parsha of Ki Tavo. De'ilav hachi, because if you don't say this, kosher, you have a major problem. Loma baklolo shel Ki Tavo. How come in the curses, meaning in the Tochacha section of our Parsha of Ki Tavo, lo nichtavu nechamos acharehen, there are no words of consolation written after the terrible words of curses, of God forbid what could befall the Jewish people if we stray too far from Hashem? Kimo osan shel b'chukosai. As we see when we look at the Tochacha section back in Parshas Bechukosai, the other place in the Torah where there are words and this terrible listing of curses. Elo lefisha hakol parsha achas, but rather we have to say that Ki Tavo and Nitzavim are connected and form one section, one unified whole. Yesh afkan nechamos b'sofa. And there are words of consolation in Parshas Nitzavim to follow up on the terrible punishments listed and articulated in Parshas Ki Tavo. Kedichsiv, as it says in Parshas Nitzavim, v'hoya ki yavo'u, and it will be when they come, when the Jewish people come to want to return to Hashem and to do tshuva, and Hashem will forgive them and accept them. So there's a happy ending. But that happy ending is described in Parshas Nitzavim in next week's Parsha. So in order for us to have the tochacha of Parshas Ki Tavo, the threats and admonitions and warnings of Parshas Ki Tavo of terrible punishments, end up with a happy ending and the Jewish people repenting and being connected again with Hashem. In order for that to be true, you have to connect Ki Tavo with Parshas Nitzavim. If you don't do that, if you say there's no significance in trying to connect the two parshios, then as the Zera Shimshon told us, as some Meforshim try to argue, then you lose these words of Nechama from Parshas Nitzavim, the words of consolation in Parshas Nitzavim, and then you have this major problem of the terrible Tochacha and Ki Tavo with no words of consolation at the end. But we don't have that problem because the Zera Shimshon tells us the two parshios are connected. Next paragraph. According to our approach, the Zera Shimshon says, we can explain the connection between the two parshios in the following way. Shebepasuk rishon yesh kusha. Because in an earlier pasuk, it doesn't mean specifically a first pasuk. In an earlier pasuk, there's a problem. V'gam b'pasuk sheni yesh kusha, and also in a later pasuk, there's a problem. So there are two problems in psukim, which the Zera Shimshon says, "Ubasmichus yisorsu shnehem." By understanding the connection between Ki Tavo and Nitzavim, both of these questions can be answered. And here comes the two questions. How can the Torah say, this is the last pasuk, referring to the last pasuk in Parshas Ki Tavo, how can the Torah say that you should guard and observe the covenant and the mitzvos in order to be successful? We have a principle articulated in Masechta Kiddushin by Chazal, which says that in general, reward for mitzvos is not to be found in our physical world. Reward for mitzvos, spiritual reward, is in the next world, is in Olam Haba. So that principle seems to run up against the fact that we have a pasuk at the end of Ki Tavo, which says, follow the words of the bris, of the covenant with Hashem, in order to be successful. So you are going to be rewarded in this world for keeping the words of the bris, of the covenant with Hashem. But the Gemara says that shouldn't be the case. Our reward is in the next world. V'gam, continuing on the column on the left, V'gam al pasuk sheni ksav Rashi, and also regarding this second pasuk that we have a problem on, which is also the pasuk that we read from Parshas Nitzavim right before we started this section in the Zera Shimshon, the pasuk about the Jewish people being the nation of Hashem and Hashem being our God. So Rashi writes on that pasuk, Lefisha nishpa shelo lahachliv, since Hashem has taken an oath not to switch the Jewish people for another nation, right? That's what it means. Hashem will be our God, and Hashem will not, no matter what happens, Hashem will not relinquish the connection with the Jewish people. That's why Hashem is binding you to him with these oaths, with these words of swearing that we're going to be committed to Hashem and swearing that we're not going to forsake the covenant. That's because Hashem committed himself to us, so he's requiring us to commit to him. Because Hashem is not able to separate from us, since Hashem bound himself to us and is connected to the Jewish people inextricably and cannot separate himself from us. Therefore, he is giving us all of these words of taking an oath to commit ourselves completely and totally and absolutely to him, and also putting in all of the tochacha that, God forbid, if we try and break away from Hashem, chas v'sholem, and break the bris, the covenant with Hashem, then these terrible punishments will befall us, God forbid. And that's what how Rashi understands the pasuk in Nitzavim. Umikan nira, from this it would appear, shekol elu ha'olos ve'hashvuos, all of these curses and oaths, heim kiviyochol l'tovaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they apparently are only for Hashem's benefit, v'lo l'tovason shel Yisrael, and not for the benefit of the Jewish people. Ula'olam tia taromes leYisrael, and there will always be resentment on the part of Klal Yisrael al elu hashvuos, on these oaths and curses that seem to be to protect Hashem's investment, so to speak, with Klal Yisrael, connecting himself to Klal Yisrael, but are not necessarily for the good of the Jewish people. Let's explain that question. This is the second of the two questions that the Zera Shimshon says may be understood and answered, resolved by putting the two parshios together, our parsha of Ki Tavo with next week's parsha of Nitzavim. But let's understand this second question. So the Zera Shimshon says that in Parshas Nitzavim, there's a pasuk, again, that we read previously, in which it says that Hashem wants us to be his people, and he's establishing a covenant with us to be his his nation, and he will be our God. And that's inextricable. That's a permanent bond and a permanent connection. And Rashi says, and it's because of that, because Hashem is bound up with us in a permanent way, Hashem is insisting that we be bound up with him and committed to him in a permanent way. And that's why you have all of these curses about what happens if the Jewish people try and break their connection, God forbid, with Hashem. So the Zera Shimshon says, isn't that a problem? Won't the Jewish people resent the fact that, God forbid, they could suffer terrible punishments, all for kind of a legalistic reason, because Hashem wasn't comfortable being bound up with us unless we're fully committed to him as well? Is that really enough? If there, God forbid, is the possibility of all of these terrible punishments befalling the Jewish people, chas v'sholem, then it has to ultimately, those threats have to ultimately be l'tovoson shel Yisrael, for the good of the Jewish people. Otherwise, how can we accept and really truly understand that type of situation that the Torah is describing? So that's the second of the two questions that the Zera Shimshon says can be answered once you take Ki Tavo and Nitzavim and understand that they are put next to each other because there's a very strong connection between them. Mishum hachi ksav kra, because of this second question, the Torah wrote at the end of Ki Tavo, lema'an taskilu, in order that you should be successful. Keep the covenant with Hashem because it will make you successful. Ubeperek kamad avodah zara, and in the first chapter of Maseches Avodah Zara, Yalfinon mehai kra, Chazal learn out from this pasuk at the end of Ki Tavo, shekol ha'osek b'Torah nechasav matzlichin. Everyone who is involved in the study and the observance of Torah, his belongings, his property will be successful. His financial resources will grow. V'od amrinon hasam, and the Gemara also says over there in Masechta Avodah Zara, al pasuk, on the pasuk. This is a pasuk from Tehillim, on the first parak in Tehillim. Ki im besoras Hashem chefzo. The pasuk in Tehillim says that a person should not associate with Rishoyim, but rather the person should desire to be involved with Hashem's Torah. So the Gemara comments, Shahakodesh Baruch Hu osolo chafotzav. If a person is involved in osek with Hashem's Torah, then Hashem will do the things that person wants. He will help that person accomplish his desires and his aspirations. Okay, so that helps us understand and answer the second question that we just read in the previous paragraph. How can it be that all of this covenant and insistence upon the covenant is only for Hashem's benefit, but not for ours? Answer, look back at Ki Tavo, at the end of Ki Tavo, and you'll see, no, it's not just for Hashem's benefit, because the pasuk clearly says at the end of Ki Tavo, if you keep the covenant of Hashem, then you will be successful. So it's for our benefit as well. So now we're left with just the first question, which was, how can the pasuk tell us we're going to be rewarded when the Chazal teach us schar mitzvah b'ha'al maleka? We don't get rewarded in this world in general for doing mitzvos. Our reward is in the next world. It's a spiritual reward. So now we have to answer that question. Ve'ein zeh l'schar mitzvah. This idea of being successful, that is not really what we mean when we talk about the reward of a mitzvah. Ela bishvil sha'atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. But rather, when you are standing here and you're connecting yourself to Hashem, v'chule, etc., moving to the next page column on the right, Hashem hu dovuk bachem, you're connected to Hashem, and because Hashem is connected to you too, ve'eno yochel hibodel mikem, and Hashem cannot, no matter what, separate from you. Umishenidbak beHakadosh Baruch Hu, someone who is clinging to Hashem, and Hashem is connected to that people, like Klal Yisrael, ein shum ra o mazik, no possible bad thing or damage, yachol hizkarev elav, can come close and approach that person. So that's the answer to the first question. What does it mean that will be successful and will be protected by Hashem? It's not in the nature of a schar, that Hashem says, oh, you did these good things and now I'm going to reward you. It's the nature of the relationship. If we're bound up with Hashem and Hashem is bound up with us, which is exactly the meaning of the bris, the covenant that's described at the end of Parshas Ki Tavo and reiterated at the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim, put that together, and now, of course, we're being protected, and of course, we're being successful. It's natural that will be the case because of the fact that we are bound up and connected with Hashem. So we shouldn't view that as kind of an external schar, an external reward, which would go against the idea that Chazal enunciated about schar mitzvah b'hai alma leka. Next paragraph. Uvederech zeh yisuratz kashas ha'olam. This approach can also explain and answer the question of the world, the big question that everyone asks, al pasuk, on another pasuk in the Torah. This is from Parshas Ekev. V'haya Ekev tishma'un v'chule, and it will be because you listen to the commandments of Hashem. V'shamar Hashem Elokecha, and Hashem will guard you and protect you. So clearly we're being rewarded for keeping Hashem's mitzvos. The haschar mitzvos b'hai al maleka. People ask the same question. How can the Torah say in Parshas Ekev that if we keep the mitzvos and listen to the mitzvos of Hashem, Hashem will protect us and reward us? That goes against this principle. Ve'echa kodesh baruch hu osa kama haftochos l'tov lanu ba'olam hazeh. How could it be that Hashem is going to fulfill all these promises to do good things for us in this world? The whole concept of Chazal is that we're going to be rewarded in the next world, because it's the spiritual rewards that really count, that are truly significant, and that can only happen in Olam Haba. So why is the Torah seeming to say, again, the same question that we asked a few moments ago, why is the Torah in Parshas Ekev seem to say that if we listen to the mitzvos, because we do so, we're going to be rewarded? The Ode, next paragraph, and furthermore, Al Ma Sheperish Rashi Al Pasuk Zeh. Rashi has a comment on that pasuk in Parshas Ekev, very famous Rashi. Im ha-mitzvos kalos she'odom dosh ba'akevov tishma'un. If the, so to speak, less serious mitzvos that a person might trample on with his feet, you listen to those mitzvos, v'shamar Hashem, then Hashem will protect you. Lishmor lecha havtacha, so then Hashem will guard his promises and fulfill his promises to you. Ad kan lishono. So Rashi says, based on the fact that the Torah used the unusual word Ekev, this is all going back to Parshas Ekev, in order to say, because you listen to the mitzvos, you'll be protected and rewarded, the Torah used the word Ekev. Ekev means heel or foot. Why did it use that word? So Rashi says, because it's telling us that if a person listens to the mitzvos that other people step on, that other people don't take seriously, then we will be rewarded. So the Zera Shimshon says, Vikosha, this presents a difficulty. Shehoyo lo lomar, because Rashi should have said, Im af ha-mitzvos kalos, if you even listen to the light, less serious mitzvos, that would imply that a person is being completely careful, bein b'mitzvos kalos, bein b'mitzvos chamuros, whether or not it's a less serious mitzvah, so to speak, or a more serious mitzvah. If Rashi had used the language of, if a person is even careful about the mitzvos kalos, the less serious, the mitzvos that appear less serious, then we would understand that that's talking about a person who's certainly careful about the serious mitzvos and is even careful about the other the mitzvos that appear less serious. Aval haloshen shel im ha-mitzvos kalos, but Rashi's actual language where he says, if you keep the light mitzvos or the less serious mitzvos, mashma, that implies she'im yiyu nizharim b'mitzvos kalos bilvad, that if a person is careful only about the less serious mitzvos, sagi, that would be sufficient. That would be enough to bring Hashem's reward. Afim lo yiyu nizharim b'mitzvos chamuros, even if these people who are careful about these less serious mitzvos are not careful about the very serious mitzvos. V'zeh bevadai lo yitochen lo markein, and this certainly it is not possible to say. So the Zera Shimshon says that when we look at Parshas Ekev, we have our same fundamental problem about why is the Torah seeming to promise rewards in this world for mitzvos for listening to the mitzvos of Hashem, when the reward should be held over for us to be a spiritual reward in the next world. And then the Zera Shimshon says, also there's a problem with what Rashi's comments on that pasuk, because Rashi seems to imply that a person can be rewarded if all they do is follow the mitzvos kalos, the less serious mitzvos, when that couldn't be true. Rashi must mean, but doesn't say, that a person has to keep and be careful about all the mitzvos, the serious mitzvos, and even the mitzvos that appear sometimes less serious or that other people take less seriously. That's what Rashi should have said, but Rashi doesn't seem to say. So we have that problem also. Continuing. Next paragraph. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, she'ein kavonos hakosuv lasos lahem. It is not the intention of the pasuk, meaning the pasuk of in the beginning of Parshas Akev. It's not the intention of that pasuk to make elu hahavtochos l'schar kiyam hamitzvos, to say that these promises from Hashem are as a reward for fulfilling mitzvos in general. That's not what is being said over there. Because for sure we know that Chazal, they have a teaching, a principle that they teach, that we are not rewarded in general for doing mitzvos in this world. And that's why, since the pasuk in Akev was not making a general statement about all observance of mitzvos, that's why it was careful to say, V'hoya Akev tishma'un es hamishpatim ha'ela, and it will be because you listen to these mishpatim. Well, mishpatim is not a word that refers to all of the mitzvos. It's a word that refers, it means judgments, and it refers to a certain category, a certain type of mitzvah. V'yadua, and Zera Shimshon says, it is known. Sha'amishpatim heim devarim. What does mishpatim refers to? It refers to those things. Sha'afilu lo nichtavu, even if they were not written in the Torah, hayu kidoim lekaimon. It would have been appropriate to fulfill them. Mitzvos that even if the Torah never mentioned them, we would still know they're important ways to live and to follow. Kimoshe Pirish Rashi, as Rashi explains, Parshas Acharei Mos, and the Parsha of Acharei Mos, al posuk es mishpatai ta'asu. There's a posuk in Acharei Mos that says, my mishpatim, my judgments you should do, v'chule, etc. Top of the column on the left. Elu dvorim ha'amurim b'Torah. This word mishpatai, my judgments, refers to things that are stated in the Torah. She'ilu lo ne'emru, that if they were not stated in the Torah, hayu kedai la'amram, it would have been appropriate to act as if they were stated in the Torah. To do, these are things that we would do even if the Torah didn't command them. Ad kan l'shono, until here is the quote from Rashi, Uperish ha're'im. And the Mizrahi commentary on Rashi explains, Kigon, what's an example of mitzvos that we would do even if the Torah did not mention them? Kigon gezel, like the prohibition of robbery, ushvichas domim, and shedding blood, and murder. Ad kan l'shono, until here is a quote from the Re'im, the Mizrahi. So we can totally understand now what Zera Shimshon is saying. When the pasuk in Parshas Akev says that there's going to be a reward for keeping the mishpatim, it's talking about a specific category of mitzvos, namely those mitzvos which we would establish and understand that we need to keep just for the good of society, just for society to exist and to thrive, to be able to survive and to thrive. You would need these mitzvos, even if the Torah didn't mention them. For example, not to commit, not to steal, not to rob, not to murder, things that are fundamental to the healthy running of society and civilization. Those types of mitzvos, that's where it says in Parshas Akev, that's what it's talking about in Parshas Akev, the mishpatim, that you will be rewarded if you keep them. And the Zera Shimshon is going to develop and explain that idea moving forward. Umeata, next paragraph. Elu hadivarim, these things, these mishpatim, these logical mitzvos that we would know we need to do. Hateva mechayev liyos nizharim mehem. The nature of the world would obligate us to be careful about these types of mitzvos called mishpatim, af below tzivoy hakosuv, even if they were not commanded in the Torah. Umishenizhar mehem l'shem mitzvahs habore, and someone who keeps these types of mishpatim, these types of logical commandments, specifically because Hashem commanded them. In other words, the person's intention, his kavana, his or her kavana, isn't let me do them because they're logical. Let me keep these mitzvahs because we need them in society. the person's kavanah is, I'm doing these mitzvos because Hashem commanded them. Yes, I understand that these are things we would want to do and want to establish in society, even if Hashem didn't command them. But why am I keeping them? Why am I careful about them? Because they are mitzvos of Hashem, because they are commandments of Hashem. So a person who does that, Godol Zechuso, his merit is very great. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mafticho kol elu haftachos, and Hashem makes a promise to do all of those promises that are listed there in terms of protecting and rewarding that person. Umay de amrinon, and the fact that Chazal say, or when Chazal say schar mitzvos bahai al maleka, the reward for mitzvos in this world, it doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen in this world. It happens in the next world. Hani mili b'shar ha-mitzvos. Those words were said regarding all of the other mitzvos that are not called mishpatim, the mitzvos that we would not know on our own and would not feel are necessary for the functioning of society. Mitzvos that Hashem commands us to them, and otherwise we would not have known them on our own. She'ein hateva v'kiyum ha'olam machriach l'shamram. The nature of the world and the survival of society or civilization would not compel us to keep those particular types of mitzvos. That's when we say schar mitzvos bahai al maleka. Rakheim gezeras melech al avoda. These other mitzvos, which cannot be called mishpatim, they are decrees of the king on his servants. We keep them because we are Hashem's servants, and Hashem commanded us to keep them, even if we don't understand them, even if we would not have instituted them ourselves. We keep them because Hashem commanded them in the Torah. Mipnei shehaTorah hi ruchanis. The Torah is a spiritual entity. Ve'af schar osam mitzvos, and the reward for those mitzvos that we could not logically come up with on our own, shebo chiyuva mikoach haTorah, the whole obligation to keep them only comes because the Torah obligated it. Ro'oi sheyiyeh ruchani. It is appropriate that the reward should be totally spiritual, meaning in olam haba, in the next world, and not in this world. Let's pause because there's a great chiddush being explained to us and shared with us here by the Zera Shimshon, which is that there are certain mitzvos which we can be rewarded for, and we are rewarded for in this world, and those are called mishpatim, the mitzvos that are very logical and reasonable and necessary for the functioning of society. When we keep them, we should also still have in mind that even though we understand them, the necessity for them, we're doing them and fulfilling them, and we're careful about them because they are mitzvos from Hashem. But those mitzvos, because they're necessary for this world, we can be rewarded in this world for keeping them because Hashem commanded them. However, the other mitzvos, all of the other mitzvos, which are not referred to as mishpatim and are not in that category, and had Hashem not commanded them, we would not have unknown about them. We would not have thought of them on our own to keep them because they're not necessary for the functioning of society. Those mitzvos, they are completely and solely done because they are commanded in the Torah, and the reward for them must be the highest level of spiritual reward, which can only occur in olam haba rather than in this world. Next paragraph. Avol osam mitzvos she'af below tzivoy haTorah hayinu mekaimim osam. But those mitzvos that even without a command from the Torah we would have fulfilled them, those are the mishpatim mipnei shetzrichos ba'olam hazeh. Because those types of mitzvos are needed in this world. Misha shomer osam l'shem mitzvah, someone who keeps those mitzvos for the purpose of fulfilling a mitzvah of Hashem, bevadai sheyitol scharo ba'olam hazeh. Certainly that person will be able to receive his reward in this world. Umishum hachi, and because of that, hivtiach hakosov kama havtochos, the Torah made several promises about the rewards that will come to us when we keep the mishpatim, when we keep that category of mitzvos. But we don't get rewarded in this world for the other types of mitzvos that are not part of mishpatim. Next paragraph. Umash perish Rashi, and that which Rashi commented, im ha-mitzvos kalos, back in Parshas Ekev, where it says, if the mitzvos are are the light type of mitzvos. If we keep the mitzvos which people view as less serious, Rashi was also referring to the mishpatim mitzvos that the nature of the world would obligate us to keep them. But sometimes people trample with their feet on such mitzvos. Sometimes, even though a mitzvah is logical and very reasonable, and we know we need to do it, people don't take it seriously. The hainu she'ein ha'olam zihirim mehem kigon shvichus damim. These are things the world is not careful about, like murder. Everyone knows that you can't have murder, can't be permitted. Every society has laws against murder, but there are other laws that are also logical and necessary that are not viewed as universally prohibited as universally as murder. Not murdering is something that the nature of the world and the survival of civilization obligates. And the majority of the world, thank God, is careful about realizing that murder has to be prohibited in society. But what about something like embarrassing your friend in public? When you embarrass a friend in public, that's a very serious avera, v'chadome, similar things to that. Even though we understand that to have a civilization and to have a society, we have to make it so we don't go around publicly embarrassing other people. Ein rov ha'olam nizharim mimenu. The majority of the world are not careful about a mitzvah like that. We've moved to the next page, column on the right. As Chazal state in the 4th chapter of Baba Metzia, Hamalbim Pnei Chavero, someone who embarrasses the face of his friend, Ke'ilu Shofech Damim. It's as if he murdered that person, V'chule, etc. So we see that embarrassing, publicly humiliating someone is tantamount in a certain way to murder. And the Gemara continues, B'ma'arava, in the West, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, B'mai Zehire, what is something that they're very careful about in Eretz Yisrael? Bi'achavore ape, to whiten someone's face, meaning to embarrass and humiliate someone to the point where the blood drains away from their face. They're very careful about not doing that in Eretz Yisrael. The mashma, that implies lochein b'shar hamakomos, that in other places they're not so careful about it. So clearly we see from Chazal and Baba Metzia how terrible it is to embarrass someone, and it's even compared to murder. And we understand that everyone can accept that that's a true rule, a true principle, an important value. Nonetheless, not everyone's careful about it. And that's why the Gemara said, B'ma'arava, in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they keep this, but not everyone else does. V'hashta, now that we understand that, tu leka limate, there's no longer a concern that we would make a mistake in understanding Rashi's comments. De bishmiros mitzvos kalos bilichudaihu sagi. And we would think that maybe keeping simple, small mitzvos is enough. We would never think that. Since we're talking about the mishpatim, that the nature of society and the world obligates us to keep them, and we would know that we need to follow them, even if the Torah didn't mention them. How much more so do we need to keep the most serious of those laws? For example, not to murder. The Efshar Sheyakabel Tova, and it's impossible to say that a person could receive a reward, Misha Poshea Bohem, if they commit sins in these areas of mitzvos which are obvious to everyone and logical to everyone, and everyone knows we have to have them for society to function. If a person goes around violating them, is such a criminal and a murderer that they violate those mitzvos, then of course we know God would never reward them because they happen to do some small thing. Mitzvah, but rather a person only receives a reward if they're careful about these mitzvos, the ones called mishpatim, referred to in the category of mishpatim. If a person is careful about them, l'shem mitzvah, because Hashem commanded them, not just because they're logical, kenizkar la'el, as we stated above, then that's what the Torah is saying the person will be rewarded for. So the looking back, just as a brief recap, so the Zera Shimshon started off by wanting to emphasize and highlight for us the connection, the necessary connection between our Parsha of Ki Tavo, especially at the end, and the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim, and showed us how all of that should be viewed as one unit, and how certain questions can only be answered if you're viewing them with a connection, and you're taking psukim from the end of Ki Tavo and combining them with psukim in the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim. Then it answers certain questions, and it helps us understand the fundamental question that the Zera Shimshon posed throughout the piece, which is, how do we understand the principle of Chazal that reward for mitzvos doesn't happen in this world, it happens in the next world. It helps us understand that as well. And that was a concept that the Zera Shimshon, all the way till the last paragraph, was attempting to explain and elucidate for us. And that's what he did. By explaining the differences between mishpatim, mitzvos called mishpatim, logical mitzvos that we can easily understand the necessity of having them, and all the other mitzvos which we would not on our own have been able to come up with. And we clearly see that Hashem commanded them in the Torah, and that's why we follow them, and that's why we have to always follow all of the mitzvos, even the ones that we view as logical and necessary. Yasher Koch for joining in the Zera Shimshon this week. We look forward to learning again in the Zera Shimshon in the future.